Welcome to the Flowering Daydream podcast, where daydreams become reality. I'm your host, Charlene Windus. I am so excited for today's show. I mean, I'm excited every time an episode gets recorded and released, but I'm especially excited because I've really been anticipating a conversation on death and dying. I've been following Nurse Penny. She's a hospice nurse. I've been following her work for a while, and she's just doing a really incredible job at normalizing death and dying. And so I'm just really grateful that she agreed to come on and discuss this with us and share some helpful conversation, some healing insight to the death and dying process. My very first experience with death was when I was 5 and my mom's mom shot herself, and everything was kind of a blur. We all lived in the same apartment. She used to babysit us while my mom worked, and I do remember my mom's really intense emotions and her process that was going on during that event. And then the rest of it's kind of a blur. And then my next memory is just being at the funeral. Somebody had given me a kitten, and it was at the funeral, and I was petting it and holding it, and I didn't really understand what was going on, and there was a lot of people there, and we were outside, and I didn't really connect to the process. I was really young, and everyone was really upset, and I didn't really quite grasp or understand what was going on. And then I was 5 at that time, and then when I was 7 or 8, my mom's dad died, and he had emphysema, and he was in a hospice bed in his house, and my mom and I were sitting side by side on his bed, and I remember the monitor going straight, and I remember looking at him, and he couldn't move or talk, but his eyes were open, and I remember tears coming down, the sides of his eyes, and I remember my mom, again, being really distraught over the situation, and my memories from him were not great, and so I just kind of had a disconnect of him and what was going on. But it was really helpful in the episode today when Nurse Penny talks about the drying of the eyes and the tearing process, because at that time I thought that he was hurting or he was really sad or something was going on, and that's why tears were running down his face. But she talks about the medical reasoning behind that, and it was just really comforting to hear these things and how these comforting things can then heal past experiences or bring peace to experiences that we've had. And so that's just another reason why I think it's so important that we are more open and we share more and we talk more and we just normalize this more, so that more and more can hear and learn about the death and dying processes to bring that peace internally. And then my very first actual conversation about death didn't happen until I think I was 24, and it was with my grandmother. And I talked about it in my clairvoyance episode here on the podcast, but I had to download that, premonition about her death. So I ended up moving in with her 6 months before that event and trying to spend as much time with her as I could. And I remember just asking her, are you afraid to die? And she said, no, I feel like I'm going to live forever. I'm still a little scared of what happens when those final moments are there. So to get more comfortable with death, I took a class, and within the class, we did some things like we wrote our own obituary, we attended our own funeral, and people read about us at the funeral and talked about us, and we kind of pretended we weren't there to witness our own walk-through ceremony and funeral. I read some books on how to get yourself prepared and ready to exit your body. And I even did things like put all my passwords in an Excel spreadsheet so that, whoever's left is able to delete all my apps and, access my email. I mean, even stuff like that. But even when I was in that class, I felt like doing all of those things was meaning that my time was up. It just felt like by taking those actions that I might die. And that was my own internalized projections and fear. So when you're able to assess what's going on in yourself and really separate it out and kind of break it down, then you're able to work through each of those things to where you can get to a somewhat comfortable and balanced state of energy about this particular topic. And what's even more wild when I really think about it is I had an asthma attack when I was young, and I had a partial lung collapse, and I was hospitalized for over a week. And in that experience, I think I felt like I had the opportunity to leave my body. It was like an opportunistic moment. And I remember feeling really disconnected from my body. And of course, I was on drugs and other things that were causing that to be true. But I remember looking in the mirror and not recognizing who I was. And that's how disconnected and I felt like I had like a choice in that moment. Obviously, I recovered and moved on. And then later on in life, when it was 2 months before I was supposed to get married. Well, we did get married, but it was 2 months before the wedding. And I had slept on my arm for like 9 straight hours above my head. And I woke up and my arm was purple and I had a blood clot. And so I drove myself to the hospital. Didn't really hurt or feel anything. I just thought it was weird. And they immediately checked me in and transferred me to another hospital. And I spent 2 weeks in the ICU off and on in several procedures. And then finally in a surgery called jugular subclavian turndown, I think is what they called it. In that experience, like I definitely remember living in both worlds, like leaving my body and also being here and kind of dipping in and out, especially with the drugs that I was getting during that time as well, like morphine and things like that. And I remember waking up in one of the procedures and I was convulsing. And I asked the team like why my body was convulsing. And then I like passed back out. I have like all these memories. But I guess I apparently asked my husband to bring me my laptop, and he did. And I sent some emails out. I was definitely on drugs, and my energy healer at the time was sitting at the foot of my bed. And I said, "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I got your email and it was really concerning." And I said, "Well, what does my email say?" And he said, "Well, you told me that death is near and you will succumb to your destiny," or it was something like that. It was dramatic. And of course I'm laughing because I'm like, I don't have any recollection of that at all. And so clearly, you go in and out when you're having these experiences or these near-death experiences. And again, I felt like it was an opportunity to leave. But I think both of those times between the asthma attack and the blood clot experience, the body has this trauma to recover from, this imprinting. And when you begin to layer these traumas in the body, and they don't get therapeutically dealt with or cognitively dealt with or physically dealt with and spiritually dealt with, all the layers, it begins to create this energy that kind of runs on its own, like fear, and it's just a perpetual cycle. And so later on in life, I was able to realize how to therapeutically work with that, but it's still kind of an underlying anxiety. And so I was really excited to have Nurse Penny on the show today because it's like, okay, I just want to really like break these things down. Let's just continue to like hash this out so that we can get normalized and comfortable and prepared and, go from there. And so I made it another goal to cope and deal with this death and dying process, to get our will in order and our medical directives in order, and to also decide like what would happen to our kids if both me and my husband was gone, like who would have them. Odds of all of that happening is pretty slim, but it just feels more comfortable to get all this stuff prepared and in order. And then I found this book called The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. And it's a small book, and it's by Margareta Magnusson. And so I looked for something that was within my heritage and culture. I think it's really powerful to connect to your ancestry. And when you connect to the ways that your ancestors might have done something, especially in the death and dying processes, it can be a really powerful experience of remembering. Like we have this intrinsic energetic memory. And when we connect to that, it can be really powerful. But any type of death ritual or process or whatever resonates with you is going to be the right thing. So you just have to follow your heart on what that might be. But I think anything that we do to prepare, to get comfortable, to work through our feelings and emotions around this is helpful. It's healing, and it's balancing, and it's aligning. And so I hope that you enjoy the conversation today with Nurse Penny. I plan on having several episodes on this topic as the podcast continues on. Okay, so today we welcome on the show Nurse Penny, who is a hospice nurse, and she is doing some amazing work out there of supporting and normalizing the death and dying processes. And I'm just so thankful and grateful that she agreed to come on the show today and answer some questions for us all. So welcome, Penny.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I would love to just start with you sharing your story of how you became a hospice nurse and what called you to this area of work, because that's not a very common calling.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I'm an old nurse in that I didn't start nursing school until I was 40. I had a life-changing event with a marriage and needed to get some kind of a career going. And I decided that nursing seemed like a good pathway for me. And my now ex-husband, during that time, his stepmother got cancer and she was on hospice. And I was just so impressed with those nurses and how they, their level of compassion that they had for the patients. And, I just was really impressed with the nurses. And also, earlier in my life, I kind of had a rocky path. And so I felt like I wanted to do something that was meaningful service work. So at the time, there were some things going on in nursing homes where there was abuse in nursing homes. And then I had that experience with my ex-husband's stepmother being on hospice. And so I decided it was going to be one of those two things, either go in a nursing home where I could make a difference or do hospice nursing. And it just so happened that hospice nursing was the opportunity that presented itself to me about a year after I got my nursing license. And that's how I went into it. And it's all I've ever really done.
Wow, that's amazing. So personal experience really just led you to that avenue.
Definitely. I didn't even really know what hospice was until I knew somebody that was on hospice.
What does it mean when you go on hospice?
To qualify for hospice, you have to have a terminal diagnosis with a life expectancy of 6 months or less. So hospice is focused on end-of-life care. Although, even though it's about death, because the people are obviously dying, we like to say that hospice is also about living, because we're trying to help people live their best life for whatever amount of time that they have left. So the focus becomes more about quality of life over quantity of life.
Since we're all going to die, and nobody ever really likes to talk about it, how would you recommend, I'm sure you've had many of these conversations now with the friends and family and the people that are on hospice, but how do we have these conversations without feeling like, and I've heard a number of people say this, that if we talk about it, it's somehow going to cause imminent death sooner, even though we know that's not really going to happen. So we just avoid talking about it. But what do you suggest? How do we calm and soothe ourselves into having these conversations without getting super, freaked out?
I read that question ahead of time and I thought about that a lot. And I really don't know the answer other than we just have to start talking about it. It isn't going to cause us to die any faster, and neither is going on hospice, which a lot of people think when they go on hospice, it means that they're going to die faster. And that isn't really the case. In fact, some people live longer when they go on hospice than they would have had they not gone on hospice, and we don't do anything to hasten death. It's just about supporting people through the end of their life. They're going to die with or without it. And kind of the same as far as talking about it. Yes, we are all going to die. That's a fact. But talking about it isn't going to make it happen any faster. And I just think having the conversations and putting it out there. And, there's a lot of death workers now on social media, death doulas and hospice nurses and palliative care doctors, and it's starting to kind of be more mainstream to talk about it. And I think that that's going to really help to get the conversations going.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. That's how I found you. And I actually didn't even know there were any resources out there. And I took this weekend workshop on, getting comfortable with death. And I was really scared of it before I took that class. And it really helped put my mind at ease. So I got online and I started looking for more resources. And that's how I found you. And I loved that there's comedy with you and that you're honest and you're also compassionate, but you have really good boundaries. And I just loved all of your content about it. And you've just brought me so much peace in sharing all of that online as well. So I'm really grateful for that time that you spend to do that. And I know other people are too.
Well, thank you. So, here's another thing about being able to talk about death. A lot of people have death anxiety. I had terrible death anxiety when I was in my 30s. And I think acknowledging that it's normal to have that fear is probably the first step, really, because so many people will say to me, well, I'm so terrified of dying, and then I watched your videos and I'm not anymore. And when we know that something is normal, it makes it so much easier to face it. To know that something's normal helps you to be able to face it. Because if you think something is not normal, then you don't even want to talk about it. You don't want to go there because you're worried that other people are going to think you're crazy, and that was the case with my death anxiety, because my ex-husband would kind of ridicule me a little bit about it. I'd cry and say, what if there's nothing after death? And he'd say, well, then you won't know because there's nothing. And that was unhelpful to me. So I think the first step really is acknowledging that it's normal to be afraid to talk about death. It's normal. It's normal to be afraid of death. But as far as my videos and what you mentioned that I use comedy, I really feel that it lightens up a dark topic of conversation. It helps to make it a little more digestible if you add a little humor in there. And so that's kind of why I go with that approach a lot of the time. Is I just feel like it makes it easier to learn about it if you're kind of laughing about it at the same time.
Yeah, it makes it more digestible.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, because it's really, really helped. And I'm still working on it, but you're making it a lot easier.
Thank you. I mean, I hear that all the time, like every single day. I get at least one DM on Instagram or a comment on TikTok where somebody says to me, oh my gosh, I used to be so afraid and I'm not anymore. Thank you for this. And so it really does help, I think.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't found Nurse Penny, I'll put it in the show notes, but she is on TikTok. It's at nurse_Penny. And she's also on Instagram at It's Nurse Penny. And so those are your two main areas that you post content, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, great. Well, so has being a hospice nurse developed your spirituality in any way after everything that you've seen, or how were you before and how are you now in comparison?
Oh, it absolutely has. So I wasn't raised with any kind of religion in my household. My family was not religious. Any religious experience that I had was through my own exploration, having friends that belonged to a church and going to the church to check it out. So I went, through different religious stages in my early life, but nothing really ever resonated with me. So I didn't have a very good feeling about spirituality or afterlife or anything like that until I became a hospice nurse. And once I did and started observing people at the end of life visioning, which is very common when a person is dying, that they will start to indicate or even tell us that they are seeing their deceased loved ones or sometimes pets. Once I started seeing that, it really gave me the sense of, wow, there is something really at play here. Like something is going on that is unexplainable. It really kind of solidified this belief in me that there really is something more after we die. And then about 5 years into my hospice career, my dad died. And he actually came to me after he died in the form of energy. And it was just something I can't even describe. I hate to say I was sleeping at the time because I never want anybody to think, well, you were just dreaming, because it was definitely more than that. But just my experience in hospice, my experience with my dad dying has helped me to develop this belief that there really is something after this life. And I think it's in the form of energy. I think somehow, we connect with each other in the form of energy after this life. So yeah, that's a long way of saying yes. Hospice has definitely impacted me spiritually.
Yeah, that sounds like it. That happened to me too. I I guess, agnostic. I knew something existed. I didn't resonate with any religious, practices at the time. And when my grandmother died, she was really a special person to me. I had several experiences with her that while I was awake, while I was asleep, various times. And it was so visceral, that there was just no denying, the things that were happening. And it was amazing. And it definitely, until you have an experience, it's so hard to convince or say, this exists until you've had one yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same with watching people who are dying vision, because sometimes I'll do a video about visioning and people will jump in the comments and they'll be like, oh, it's just chemicals that the brain is excreting while the person's dying. It's DMT, it's whatever, and it's like, I cannot impress upon people who have never witnessed it how profound it is. Like, when you see it, you just don't say, oh, yeah, that's nothing. That's just a chemical in their brain. The people who are visioning are so persuasive, and what they're explaining to you what they're seeing. It's like you start to feel that you're the one who's maybe got something wrong with you because you can't see what they see.
Yeah.
So
it's very specific,
incredible and very specific. And sometimes it's not specific in the beginning, but then it becomes specific as they move closer towards the end of life and they start to recognize what they're seeing. Then it's even more specific. But yes, and when it is very specific, that's especially profound. It's just amazing to see somebody that's crying and calling out his wife's name and saying, she's right there, I see her. It's amazing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you see a lot of that transition. You're kind of like a threshold for people that you're witnessing. That's pretty phenomenal. Well, do you think that dying hurts? We all want to know.
No. I mean, there are, and it of course depends on the dying process itself is not a painful process. The body knows how to shut down, and in a naturally dying person, somebody that has a disease and they're dying, or, some whatever is going on with them and they're dying, kind of a slow progression towards death, the body shuts down systematically. It knows what to do. What is painful sometimes, most of the time usually, is the disease that's causing the death. So if somebody has cancer, that can be really painful. There's different diseases that a person can have that can be painful. The actual dying part is not painful. And fortunately, we do have the ability to help people that are in pain most of the time. We're very good at managing pain in hospice. That's our expertise, is managing pain. But I've had patients who were very old and had dementia, didn't have any major disease going on, no cardiac issues, no cancer. They just had dementia, and they were failing and they were dying. And they might have mild pain from laying in the bed too much, but otherwise there's no pain. You don't have to give them any morphine. They don't require any kind of medication. They just are shutting down and dying. And that in and of itself is not painful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Well, if you know that you're dying, like say you do have a terminal illness, for example, versus, a car accident and you had no notice, is there a process or a system, or is there some kind of support specifically that we can do to kind of surrender? Or do some people just fight it till the end and some don't? And does that really matter in the end?
Well, it can matter. So some people do fight it, and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to face it. They don't want to discuss it with their family. They don't want to plan for it, which becomes very problematic if they haven't put anything in writing or they haven't designated a legal decision maker. That can be really problematic. Those people don't usually die very well. Now, every death I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot, has always ended peacefully at the very end. But there can be a lot of trauma up to that point if a person is not accepting of their death, especially if there's a family conflict going on, which is due to a lack of planning. But if you want to, kind of work towards surrendering, I think the first thing you have to start doing is thinking about, what do you want for yourself? Who is going to make those decisions for you when you can no longer make those decisions? Getting your legal documentation in place, your advance directives, those types of things are very, very important and should be taken care of immediately when you find out that you're dying. If somebody says you have a terminal condition, you really immediately need to start working on your advance directives. After that, I think legacy work is really a great way to move towards that. And that can be looking through your pictures and picking out all the ones that you want to, live on after you die, and throwing away the ones that you don't want people to see. Writing notes to your family members, I've even had patients who wrote their own obituary, and some who make their own funeral arrangements, and, just legacy work. What are you going to leave behind? Going through your personal items and making sure that you have told people what things mean to you, why you have them. Like if you have a jewelry box full of jewelry, I've got all kinds of jewelry. My daughters need to know, where did those come from? Who do I want to have what? Where did this come from? Why do I still have this? What does this mean to me? That type of thing is a great way to kind of ease your way into that surrender. So those are all things that you can do that will help, and also is kind of helps towards making your death more peaceful as you are going through kind of that life review sometimes when you're going through your things, because I think life review is a big part of the dying process as well.
And do you think if you have like a regret or you haven't said sorry, do you think that helps too, if they're able to? I think I saw in one of your videos that sometimes people will wait until that last person comes that they need to see, and then they'll die, or they hang on until that last person.
Yeah, that can go either way. Sometimes people are waiting for somebody to arrive, and sometimes they're waiting for everyone to leave. So yeah, that can go either way. But yes, if you have regrets, if you have, closure is really important. If there is something that is weighing heavy on your heart, then it's going to be more challenging for you to be able to be at peace and let go and die. So definitely, I've seen where a patient had a situation with a family member that wasn't good, and it really needed some resolution before they could die, before they could be at peace and die. So anything like that is really important, making amends with people, or, finding forgiveness for others, or seeking forgiveness for yourself.
Yeah. I found in my research process, I only found one book, and I think it was called The Swedish Death Cleansing Rituals or something, but it was just a small book. And one of the things that she had said in there was to label everything in your house, like who's going to get it. And I went around my house going, this feels so weird. I'm 41. I don't think I'm going to die anytime soon, but it made me feel better. And I just and then I typed it up and put like a little thing together, and it just made me feel better. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, everything is kind of over the top maybe, but but definitely the personal items that are important to you for sure are those that you want to label. I don't know if I need to go through my silverware drawer and label all my silverware, but
well, isn't it so just odd to think about, like, oh, you've accumulated these things that might be of importance to you, and then one day they just won't be, it's just kind of
that
a weird,
is very odd.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, my dad was a collector of things, and after he died and we started going through his stuff, we laughed so much about the multiple items that he had. Like, he had 3 sets of golf clubs and 3 tool sets, and we were laughing like he had enough for each kid to take one thing, because he had so many things that he had accumulated all those years. But I do think, what really makes you think about that is if you ever go to an estate sale and everything's on sale, including like the person's underwear and just every little thing that they own is sale. Wow. If you go to enough estate sales, it will definitely prompt you to start thinking about what you have in your house and what you don't want people to be rummaging through after your death.
Oh boy. I better go back and look again. I've never been to an estate sale. That's got to be interesting too. And I'm really in tune with energy. I imagine that would be just a lot of that person's energy in one space.
Yeah, definitely. You should go to one. They're really interesting to go to one.
Yeah. Where do you even look for that? Is that like in the paper or online, or where does
Yeah, you can look in the paper. Yeah, look in the paper. It's not like a garage sale. It's usually an estate sale is run by like a company that'll come in and do, they'll price everything out and sell just everything in the house. I mean, they come into your house and everything goes.
Wow.
So yeah,
And so when
it's
you think
pretty.
about dying, it's like think about what you're accumulating materially versus like emotionally and experientially, right? Like what are you living for? Because
Mhm.
everything's just gonna get sold off.
Really, I mean, really, there is a lot to that for sure. But I still have, I mean, and you would think that I'd be an expert at that since I am a hospice nurse. I've been doing this for, so many years, but I still have a collection of things, scrub tops. In fact, my husband and I just downsized from a almost 3,000 square foot home to a tiny little cabin in the mountains. And I have 40 scrub tops and I cannot get rid of them. I can't get rid of them.
Well, who knows? Maybe you'll make a quilt out of them or something.
That's a good idea. I never thought of that.
Yeah. Well, that sounds nice. A cabin. Is that did you guys do that just because you felt like it, or are you both retiring or
Well, he retired. He retired early because of COVID. And I now work. I don't do patient-facing care right now. I'm a hospice quality manager for a large hospice agency, and I was able to start working virtual when COVID happened. And so we owned this cabin, and we used to vacation here. And I've been wanting to, that is one thing that hospice does for you. Working with dying people really puts into perspective how important your time is and how limited your time can be. And I did a lot of commuting prior to being able to work virtually and sitting in traffic on the I-5 corridor. And it was just like horrible, such a waste of my time. And really even more so emphasized about what a waste of time it was because of the fact that I've taken care of so many people younger than me who have died, and it's kind of like, gosh, I don't want to keep wasting my time doing this. Life is really short and you have to, do what makes you happy. And so the opportunity was just there for us. The housing market, as it got good. We were in a place to be able to sell our house, and he retired and I can work virtually, and we just decided just to pull the trigger and go for it.
That's
So
wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds great. Well, I loved your answer with this online in a video that you had posted because it wasn't what I thought the answer would be. But can you share with our listeners what the worst death is that you've witnessed?
So the worst death is when the family is not in agreement. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, yes. And I wasn't expecting you to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the worst death. I mean, you can manage symptoms really well with medication. And, so we can really treat symptoms quite well. But when you have a person who has existential suffering, that is less manageable. And when it's caused by the family, it's even worse. And so when you have a family that's in disagreement, and you've got one on one side of the bed yelling over the top of the patient at the other one, it's extremely traumatizing to the patient to have to be going through that, and to the people who are involved and to the staff who are watching, to see that happening. It's just horrible. That really is the worst death to me, is when people will linger too, like they can't let go. They're not at peace when their family members are arguing. And that's where those advanced directives come back into play, because so in every state, rule is going to be different when it comes to who is going to be the legal decision maker. Now, in the state of Washington, there's a chain of who gets to be the surrogate decision maker. If you're married, it's your spouse. If you're not married, it's your adult children. If you don't have adult children, it's your living parents. If you don't have living parents, it's your siblings. So when you have a patient who has 5 siblings and none of them are on the same page, it is a very challenging situation because they all have to agree with all the decisions that are being made for that person when they can no longer speak for themselves.
Oh
So that is
man.
definitely, yeah, that's definitely the worst death that
So
I've
if
seen.
so
I've
if
seen it more than once.
So if you don't have the advanced directives, it just auto moves to the husband, then to the parent, then goes through that
Yep,
process. Okay. And then how do
yep,
you
yep.
even you type that up and you take it to a lawyer and have them notarize it, or how do you even do that?
Yeah, you can. So the easiest thing to do, and it's something that's legal in our state, is called Five Wishes. And you can get it from agingwithdignity.org. I think it's like $6 if they send you one, or you can print it off. It's a booklet. It's really easy to read. It's got all kinds of things in there about what you want for yourself. And not just like, do you want CPR or not, but things like, I want to be cared for with, happiness and joy. I want somebody to pray at my bedside. It's got all these different things, and you can cross off what you don't want. You can leave what you want. You can add things to it. And it's legal in 42 states. I believe you have to have it witnessed, but you don't have to have it notarized. So that's something anybody can do. Like you could do that now and have that, and at least it guides your family. In fact, I even tell people, if it's not legal in your state, still get it and fill it out, because it will guide your family to know what you want. So even if it's not a legal document, it helps them to understand what you want in case you don't get your legal documents in place. People who are terminally ill or advanced in age, you don't have to be terminally ill, but you can get what's called, it used to be called a physician order for life-sustaining treatment, a POLST in Washington, and now they've changed the name to portable orders for life-sustaining treatment, still a POLST. It's a bright green form, and that is more something that your doctor is going to sign, and it's going to have your do not resuscitate on there, or full code. Give antibiotics or don't give antibiotics, tube feed or don't tube feed. It's got really basic medical decisions that a person would want to have. So usually when somebody comes onto hospice, we really work towards getting them to have a POLST in place, because that helps to guide their decisions. One thing that people don't understand about advanced directives is they only come into play when the person who is dying is no longer decisional and able to speak for themselves. And sometimes family members will try to, intervene on the patient's behalf, or tell us, don't tell them you're from hospice. We don't want them to give up hope. And we have to say, look, if they're actually electing the hospice benefit, and if they're decisional, then we are obligated to tell them, this information, because it is informed consent. But it's only when that person can no longer speak for themselves that the advanced directives come into play.
Right. So while we have all of our faculties and awarenesses, it's a good time to do this no matter what age you are, and be more prepared so that none of that's happening while you're trying to die.
Absolutely. And they can be changed, you always can change things. You can usually Google advanced directives online, print it out. I don't believe in the state of Washington they have to be notarized anymore. We've just had some changes in the law recently around advanced directives, and I think they made it so that you can just have witnesses and not have them notarized. But I really love Five Wishes. I really urge people to check Five Wishes out, because to me it's kind of it eases you into some of the decisions. There's some hard medical decisions in there too, but some of the stuff is kind of things that you wouldn't normally think about. Like I said, I want people to be happy when they're taking care of me. I want them to be joyful. I want them to tell jokes at my bedside. That type of thing that's in there.
Oh, I like that. I want that. So when you talked about you noticed that there's this energy that kind of lives on, do you think that energy, that soul or that spirit, does it leave before the physical body dies ever, or is it always sort of after the physical death?
So, I don't know if you've seen a video that I did, and actually it was probably one of the very first videos I did on TikTok that really went viral, and kind of was what the impetus for me continuing to talk about hospice on TikTok. But early on in my nursing experience as a hospice nurse, before I really had experienced a lot of people dying, I was taking care of an elderly lady who had a daughter that was a nun. And so there were a lot of nuns coming to visit this lady. And it was a Sunday evening. I was at the nurse's station, and the patient's room was across the hall from the nurse's station. And the last visitor came out of the room, and it was a nun. And she walked up to me and she said, "Oh, she's gone." And I stood up and I grabbed my stethoscope and I said, "Oh," and she said, "Oh, no, no, no. Her body is still here doing the work of dying, but her spirit has left. You can see it in her eyes." So I was fascinated by that. I was like, wow, that's interesting. So as soon as the nun left, I walked into the room to take a peek at this patient, and I could see what she meant. When a person is dying, they get to this point where they're unresponsive and their eyes are open, but they're just not looking at anything anymore. They're just kind of vacant and staring out. It's like I always say, the lights are on, but nobody's home. And it really does give you that impression that like their spirit or their soul has left, and now their body is just still here doing the work of dying. And so I've seen that, hundreds of times now, and I've seen thousands of times. I've seen actively dying patients have that look. But I also had a patient, a young man who was in his early 40s, dying of lung cancer, and he was very fearful. He didn't have any family present with him, and the aide and I were in the room with him at the time. And he was, you could tell he was fearful and anxious. There was no more medication I could really give to him. I mean, it's hard to medicate away fear. And we were each standing on either side of the bed, holding his hand. And he looked up at the ceiling, and he just had this look of peace that washed over him. Like it just all of a sudden his face relaxed and he became so peaceful. And then he took his last breath and died. And I remember just looking at the other aide, at the aide and saying, "Have you ever seen anything like that?" And she was like, "No, I've never seen anything like that. Have you ever seen anything like that?" And I was like, "No, I never have." I mean, it was just an incredible experience.
Wow.
So yeah, I do think the spirit leaves before the body dies.
That's amazing. Well, is this thing different than that, where you talk about the gray eyes when someone's dying, and like the tear thing that you talked about on TikTok?
Oh, so what you're talking about is when their eye color changes. So there's two things. People's eye color will often change at the end of life, and it bothers the family. They'll be like, "Why did their eyes look that color? That's so weird that happened." And that's just because your cornea needs an exchange of oxygen, and if it gets oxygen depleted, then it will get kind of the cornea, the lens over your eye will get distorted a little bit, and it can change the appearance of the color of the eye. The eye itself doesn't change color, but it makes it look like it's changing color. And that's different than what I was speaking about before, where the lights are on and nobody's home. That's completely different than this eye color change that can happen, and it doesn't happen with everybody. And then as far as the tear goes, people often will think that meant that their person was sad when they died, that they shed a tear. And again, the eyes are open while the person is dying. And so our body's response to an eye drying out is to create tears, but they're not blinking their eyes. And so those tears aren't coming out. When they die and all the muscles relax in their whole face, then the tear can be released.
Oh,
so it's
yeah.
more of a biological function. It's not an emotional response.
That's comforting, because I remember being quite young, sitting next to my grandfather that was dying, and he was, in a bed in the house kind of a thing. And right before he died, those tears came. And I remember being a kid thinking, man, he's so sad, and when I saw your video, I'm 41 now. I was like, that makes me feel a lot better. So you're like healing inner child parts over here.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from people. Like, "Oh my gosh, when you did that video about them not wanting to eat at the end of life, for 15 years, I thought we starved my dad to death. And now I understand that he didn't eat anymore." It was like, yeah. that I love getting those kinds of messages from people, because I on one hand I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so sad that you had to suffer for all these years thinking that, but I'm so thankful that I was able to help clear that up for you.
Yeah, just some education about the death and dying process should be like a part of, elementary or middle school or something, because it's like you don't know any of these things. And some people live their whole lives feeling responsible for things in the death and dying process of loved ones. And it's like not, some of it is science or medical things.
Definitely, definitely. Or they have fear around what happened because they don't know that it was normal. So that's, I always say, I like to educate and normalize death, because so many things that happen during the dying process are normal, and when people don't know that, it's scary to them, especially like the death rattle. That really causes a lot of fear in people. And so many times when I've been with a family and I've said, oh, that's normal, and they go, oh, it is? Yeah, you can just see the relief. It's palpable. They're like, oh gosh, okay. To know that it's normal just makes them feel so much better.
Yeah, it sure does. Well, you posted a video that also near the end that people will reach into the air. Is that part of the visioning or the hallucination, or is that different, or what are they reaching for?
Well, so that's what I think. So, and first of all, let me just make a distinction between visioning and hallucinating, because we do definitely think of them as two different things when it comes to end of life care. Visioning is when a person is seeing deceased loved ones or pets. It's very always the same theme, across the board with patients who can communicate this to us. That's what they see. Hallucinations are typically something that are more abstract. They might cause them to be afraid. It could be spiders coming out of the ceiling. I had one guy that told me there's spiders coming out of the ceiling. That is not visioning. That doesn't bring comfort. Something's going on. It's a medication side effect. It's a part of their disease process. And we are going to try to get to the bottom of what's happening and usually give them medication to make that go away. Whereas with visioning, we don't do anything to intervene on that. We just allow that to happen because it brings the person so much comfort. Families sometimes are concerned and they'll say, oh, he's hallucinating. He said my grandma's in the room. And then we say, no, actually, that's normal. That people do see their deceased loved ones at the end of life. It's okay. We don't want to medicate that away. But my opinion about the reaching into the air is that I do believe it has something to do with visioning. And I believe that because most of the time when people are visioning, they're indicating that the people that they're seeing or the pets that they're seeing are up above. They're up above, or they're in the corner of the room. So they're up. And so that's why I always feel like when they're reaching into the air, that they're reaching for those things. That's what my belief is about that. And then also, people will do things with their hands when they're dying related to their work. Like we've had a guy that was driving a truck all night long, and he was grabbing the steering wheel with his hands and driving a truck and talking about driving the truck. And people who will smoke cigarettes, that type of thing as well, which is a little different. But I did have a patient who was with her daughter, and her daughter told me this story. And she said her mom was kind of with both of her hands motioning towards her chest, stroking her chest, and saying to her daughter, well, I need this. And her daughter said, your gown, your hospital gown? And she said, no, this. And she started indicating her body, like she was touching her body. And her daughter said, oh, like she was asking if she was going to need her body anymore. And she was describing like all these windows of time that was telling her daughter, like all these different things that she could see, like with life review. And I just always thought that was so interesting that she was asking if she was going to need her body anymore. And it was very close to it was shortly before she died. She died that day. And it was shortly before she died that she was saying all of that.
Wow. Yeah. That's fascinating. Well, can you tell us, I saw in another one of your videos that and I'm sure most nurses probably know this, but it sounds like some of them don't, why you wouldn't open a window immediately after someone dies. You talked about it being a cultural practice.
Yeah. So in hospice, we have to meet people where they're at culturally, spiritually. We're not allowed to proselytize. Can't go into somebody who's on their deathbed, they're vulnerable, and say, hey, I can help you get to heaven. You just have to accept Jesus into your heart. Like, we are not allowed to do that. Medicare does not allow that. And I put cultural practices in the same category as religious practices. And to me, it's like proselytizing to open a window. And the reason why I do is because when I was working in a hospice care center, we had a patient who died, and one of the aides went in and opened the window before the family could come into the room and see the patient, and they were very upset. It was not their cultural practice to open the window, and they felt that the spirit of their person had been let out of the room before they had a chance to go in there. So I always tell people, do not just open the window. You need to check with the family. Is that your cultural practice? I'm happy to open it for you if you want me to, but you don't just arbitrarily open a window after someone has died, because that may not be their practice.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because that's not something that would have crossed my mind, because I always reach for fresh air whenever I feel stressed. And it could be
Yeah.
it could be really easy to just do that really quick and not be thinking about that. So yeah, thank you.
A lot of people don't think about it. They just think, oh, that's kind of nice. I'll open the window and the spirit can go out, and they don't think, oh, that's the same as putting a Bible on an atheist at the end of, you don't do it.
Yeah, we should definitely think before we act. Well, I didn't put this on the questionnaire that I sent you ahead of time, but it's coming up right now. And I'm wondering if when you go home, after you were in person in these situations, did you ever feel like that energy or the spirit of that person was still kind of with you? Or did you have a practice to kind of, detach from that? Because that's a lot of energy to be around every day.
Yeah, it is. Mostly I didn't. People ask me all the time, how do you do that kind of work without being really sad? And the key word there is work. It's your work. It's what you do for a living. And you have to separate yourself emotionally and have good emotional boundaries, because, otherwise you would just not be able to survive it. If you became too emotionally involved with people and their families as they're dying, you couldn't survive it. As far as spiritually, that energy, it's interesting. People ask me, have you ever seen a spirit when a person died? Did you ever see the spirit leave the body? And no, I never did. And I didn't see the spirits of the people that my patients were visioning, but you have the sense that they're there just by witnessing, like witnessing what's happening. You can sense that they're there, but I've never felt that I took any of that with me. But there was a situation with one patient who I was intensely involved with. It was a very challenging situation. He was a young man in his early 50s and lived alone, and his family wasn't able to care for him. And it was a lot of care coordination and getting him into a place where he finally was willing to go into a hospice care center, and he was a full code. And I had to spend a lot of time with him explaining to him what that was really going to mean. And I was going to be going on vacation, and it was just so emotionally challenging for me, because I didn't want to leave knowing that he was going to, at some point, he was very close to the end of life. He was going to turn the corner and be in that actively dying phase, and that they were going to have to then transport him to the hospital and put him on life support, because he was not willing to have a do not resuscitate order. And so as I was leaving the building, I just couldn't leave. I just couldn't leave it like that. And I turned back around and I said, I have to talk to you about your code status. I'm very concerned about this. If your heart stops beating, they're going to pull you off of this bed onto the floor, and they're going to do CPR. And this was a guy who was extremely fragile. He was like a skeleton with skin on. He had tumors coming out of his gut, several tumors. And I said that, I was pretty graphic in my description about what was going to happen to him. And I said, it's going to be really traumatic on your body. And he looked at me and he goes, Penny, I want you to tell me something. Is this a good place to die? And I said, this is the best place to die. Look out your window. Look at this beautiful garden that's outside of your window. This is a good place for you to die. And he said, okay, then I'm going to change my code status. Bring me that piece of paper. So I went on vacation after that, and I was able to check my email from my phone to see the death list. And I kept expecting him to die, and it wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. And I'm just like, I cannot go back to work. I can't do it. I said my goodbyes. I mean, it's just been so emotionally challenging for me. So I actually called in sick on the day that I was supposed to return to work. And I was sitting outside at our cabin in the mountains, and I looked up in the sky and I saw an eagle flying over the sky. And I was like, he's gone. That's it. He died. And sure enough, he was on the death list and he had died. And I think that was probably the only experience I ever really had with the patient where I felt like somehow that spirit was connected. And it was just such an intense, case management situation. And it was something that just really impacted me spiritually.
While you were talking, I had little goosebumps and like my hair kind of stand up a little, like I could feel that energy. That's amazing.
Well, and the interesting thing too is that he had an estranged son. And so I heard about this from my social worker after I got back. His son finally came to see him in the hospice care center. And he said, I don't remember his words now. It's been many, many years, but I remember that he held his son's hand and said to him, I can die now. And he died peacefully. Aww. At that moment. Like he shut his eyes and died, which doesn't happen very often. Like people don't, it's not like in the movies where people go, okay, goodbye. And then they close their eyes and die. That just does not happen very often. It does happen, but it doesn't happen very often. But that was one of those situations where he kind of was like, I'm ready to go now, and closed his eyes and died. And he had just been waiting for that, to have his son accept him and to have that estrangement be over with.
Oh man, if that doesn't give us all motivation to live a reconciled life, I don't know what does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This guy who was like dead walking too, like you have these patients and you're like, how are they still alive? How are they even still alive? Because they just there's nothing left of them. And that was definitely one of those situations where he needed to have that resolution before he could finally die peacefully.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for answering all these questions. I just have one more question, and I just kind of want to wrap it up for everyone that's listening. Like what's like the checklist we should do here so that we can all die with peace and ease and grace? And I know you said the advanced directives are good. And I saw in a couple of places that you said there's some more specific things too, like don't give me drugs, give me all the drugs. Don't give me fluid, give me the fluids. Can you go down that kind of list to prepare us for what we should get in order here?
Well, like I said, advanced directives. What do you want and what do you not want at the end of your life? Is very important. Making sure that you don't wait until you're terminally ill to work on your bucket list. Like, do the things that you want to do now. Don't wait until it's too late. Definitely don't put things off, that you think that you're going to want to do someday. Do it now. Those are important to make sure that you recognize that life is short. Tell the people in your life who you care about that you care about them. Don't ever go to bed mad at your family. Resolve your issues. Always making sure that if you find out tomorrow that you're dying, that you have the things that are important to you taken care of.
Oh my gosh, my heart is just like so filled with what you're saying right now. I feel like I do this every day, and I feel like even my partner sometimes is like, boy, that's morbid, and it's like, no, I feel like we just need to really be in reality about the facts here, and it's not like I'm living in fear. But I do feel that way every day. It's like one last kiss, one last I love you, just kind of finishing the day feeling good.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And also, thinking really a lot about what do you want for yourself at the end? Do you want to be in a hospital at the end? Where do you want to be when you're dying? Do you want to be in your home with your people around you, or do you want to be in the hospital? Yeah. What's important to you as far as where you are, and thinking about what you need to do to make sure that happens for you.
Thank you so much, Penny.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a really interesting conversation, and I know a well-needed conversation. And if anyone wants to connect with Nurse Penny more, you can find her on TikTok and Instagram. And was there anything else that Penny you wanted to share? Any offerings or any links or anything that you think is relevant to today's talk?
I would like to just reemphasize, and it's not a paid announcement, but the 5 wishes can be found on agingwithdignity.org. And I recommend that for everyone, even if it's not legal in your state as an advance directive, just because it's going to really help to guide your family to what you want to have done for you if you're in a position of being terminally ill.
Thank you for listening to this episode on Death and Dying with Hospice Nurse Penny. My name is Charlene Windis, and I'm your host of the Flowering Daydream podcast, where daydreams become reality. You can find me at charlenewindis.com, on Udemy, and on Insight Timer. And don't forget to rate and review and subscribe to the podcast.